Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here, and my guest today is an architect who turned a quilter, Luke Haynes. Hi, Luke.
How are you? Hello, everyone.
Hi. So I was watching actually like some of your interviews where you were talking about like why you decided to get into quilting versus staying an architect. And you were saying how like at the end of the day you rather do something for yourself and not be dependent on the contractors and other people's ideas. Have you ever regretted it?
Um, I love architecture, so I certainly miss it. I miss the scale, and I have all of these ideas. I would love to kind of build my own house and this kind of stuff, which is much easier when you're already working with contractors, and you could just sort of do your own. So I miss that, but no regrets at all. I really think that it's been such a wonderful experience to have learned more about quilting and travel the world for quilting as opposed to working with clients locally all the time and fighting with the city on permits and everything.
Right.
So no regrets.
So you started though, like before you ever consider quilting, you were a knitter also, right?
Right, yeah, that's what I call my gateway craft.
So how old were you when you started knitting?
Let's see, I was probably oh boy, 13, something like this.
And what appealed to you about knitting?
I was at a boarding school, and there's just a lot of downtime at boarding school. And I saw other people knitting, and I thought, gosh, that looks interesting, because I've always really appreciated the idea of making functional things. Knitting is a good sort of art because at the end you have a sweater or a hat or socks or something that you can use. And I think that's really interesting, and that's what brought me into architecture later and, quilting, the idea of sort of a utility-based art practice, but also just like something you can take with you. You can knit anywhere. If you have busy hands, and I was always a very busy kid, so it was something I could always kind of bring out and do during a meeting or drive a long road trip or something.
Right. Well, when you started like considering quilting, what appealed to you about quilts? Like, was it the history of it? Was it the fact that you also doing it with your hands? Like, what was it? The first.
I I wish I thought about it that much at the beginning. The first few quilts I made, I just wanted to see if I could make a picture with fabric. It was only an experiment in art school, trying to see if I could make a picture using only fabric. So at first it was just an experiment that I wanted. Then I kept making more experiments, and then I got pulled in more by the history and the utility of the object. So I would be lying if I said I did all of that on purpose. Or it was just I thought it might be fun to make a picture out of fabric.
Well, I mean, at the very beginning, like, have you ever considered like making just the traditional quilt with traditional shapes, like, you know?
So, I mean, no, it took me 10 years till I made my first traditional quilt. Probably my 300th quilt was my first traditional one. But at first, no, because at first it was just an experiment. Can I make pictures in fabric? And then, okay, well, now I understand a little bit more about quilting. I still want to make pictures in fabric, but now I want to make it, the size of a quilt. So, I kind of change the size or whatever. But, it didn't, at first, it never occurred to me to just make a traditional patchwork.
If you think about quilts, right, they functional art, but they also like people consider that craft. They not consider it necessarily art. Like,
Yeah.
where do you see yourself? Like, do you see yourself as a crafter or as an artist when it comes to quilts?
I mean, I see myself as an artist first, but I don't know that they are mutually exclusive. I mean, I think a craft, an artist should be a craftsperson because they should really take pride in what they make, and that I think that's where the craft comes in. And I think the art comes in where the intention of the maker is to maybe change the world, bring something new and different, a new perspective or new understanding to whatever practice they're working on. So I think one can be both. I try to be both anyway. That's the hope.
Right. Well, one of the quilts that I saw that you made, had this figure that like if you look at it from the front you like sort of get the image, but if you walk to the side you see the full image. And you were mentioning how like you have the sculptural approach to the quilt. How did that evolve? Like, was that the idea from the beginning, or did you somehow come to that?
So that piece was definitely done on purpose because I wanted to explain that quilts are sculpture items. So by making someone have to walk around it, you end up sort of explaining that it's a three-dimensional object. And I think quilts so often are undervalued in the world of sculpture. They're more often thought about like fabric paintings, and I think that doesn't get to the full heart of the quilt. So I wanted to make a series that really talked about that.
Right. So like some of your quilts have like full size human figures on it, like as an applique. Do you first make the quilt and then put that on top, or is that part of like quilting process?
It depends on the quilt, but a lot of times I will make the quilt first and then put the figure on top of it because I don't want it to stretch. Sometimes it stretches if it gets too much fabric in one place.
So like what, those figures, do you draw them first? Because some of them, like I've seen you have like portraits of your friends. Like, so are you like an amazing artist before you anything else?
I don't know about amazing, but you know, I do design them before I make them in fabric, for sure.
Right. And like one of those quilts I saw, you had a friend of yours who was sitting in the chair, and then like the same material that she had in her skirt was used in the quilt. Is that the thing? Like, is that what you do? Like you?
No, I mean, that was for one series. I haven't done it that much. So I did a whole series where I had people come and get their photo taken, and then they left me what they were wearing. And then I made their portrait out of their own clothing. I haven't done it that much because, you know, people have to give me what they're wearing.
Right.
And it also is not much fabric, so they have to be small. And I like to make big pieces.
So like when you coming up with the ideas for quilts, like what's the progression of it? Like, do you always think in series, or you start something and then you come back to that and create and it becomes a series?
You know, that's a good question. So one thing that I notice if I look at other people's work, you know, big famous artists, I trust them more if they make a series of something, then it makes me believe that they did it on purpose. And so I really try to make several, at least, you know, often I'll make a series just so that I can kind of prove to an audience that I did it with intention.
And I saw like one of the series that you made was where you basically took the same square and then you reshaped it in like 200 something different ways. Is that like to challenge yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was to challenge myself and to teach myself because I'm not coming from quilting, I'm coming from architecture. And so I created a design challenge for myself to learn.
How do you like, in general, approach your quilts? Like, do you see them as something you conquer, sort of? Like, do you see them as challenge?
You know, that's a very good question. I've never thought about it that way, but yes is the answer. Absolutely. I want to be better every time. So it is my goal to conquer new ideas, I guess. Yeah.
Right. So like if you look back at your first pieces at like the very beginning, right? What do you see? Like, are you critical of them? Do you look at them and like, oh my God, I can't believe I made this mess? Like, or you see already like today's look in those pieces?
I mean, I see some of what I am now. You know, I look back and I'm a little embarrassed, right? Because, you know, I would take these pieces to galleries and museums and say, you know, hey, show me, buy this, whatever. And, you know, looking back, my skill set is obviously increased in 15 years. And so I'm a little bit embarrassed, but, you know, I was always trying to do my best at any time. And so it's, I think, good to look back and say, I know more now because it shows that I have been working this whole time. But I definitely see a lot of the ideas that have come through again in different ways.
So you have this one series where you, it's you lying on the bed, basically. So there is a figure of you as part of the quilt. lying on the bed. And you mentioned in one of your interviews that you like to come back to it like every year and see the how you changed and how like your quilting changed. Is that like almost like a diary of Luke? Like, do you have all of those pieces as a collection?
So I don't own them all. There's a couple that have been acquired by museums, but exactly, it's a diary of my experience and my skill set over time.
Right. So like when you sell a piece, when you have to part with that quilt that you worked endless hours, do you ever have hard time parting with your art?
No, never, never, because they pay me for it, and that's how I live and eat. And the people who buy it they'll let me loan it back if I want to put a show up. Or plus, as I say, it's my goal to always make better. Every time it should be better. So if I can sell something that I made before, that gives me more space to make something better.
Right. So like when you work on the quilt, right? And you mentioned somewhere that it can take you like up to 400 hours.
Yeah.
During those 400 hours, are you like exclusively thinking about the quilt that you work on, or does your mind wander into like future projects?
Oh, I'm always thinking about future projects for sure. I mean, quilting has so many sort of tedious moments, and during those moments you get some nice like meditation where you can just sort of just think about anything you want, or kind of free your mind. But other times, I start to think about what I'm working on and think, oh gosh, how can I do this better or differently, or something like that. So I'm planning the next one every time I'm making one for sure.
So I was interviewing Zach Foster, who is like friend of yours on Instagram.
Yeah.
And do you get inspired by like each other? Do you like what makes you friends with other quilters? Because like his approach is not necessarily similar to yours.
So the people that I love are the people who are pushing their own skills and the industry itself. So I really like Zach because he is constantly trying to do better work, and he is constantly trying to reimagine what it means to be a quilter. And the way that he does it is very different from me. He's really into creating community, and he's really good at making things with a lot of people. And the burial quilts he makes are so wonderful and such a good dialogue with the family. And I think that's just so important. And I really love kind of talking to him about his approach because it is different than mine.
Right. Well, when you do your quilts, right? Is there like any part of it that you wish somebody else would do for you? Like, is there like least favorite part of quilting?
I mean, half of it. Someone, I would love to, just say, okay, finish this for me. I know the binding. I just, once it's time for the binding, I would love someone else to do it because in my mind it's already finished, and at that point it's just busy work, and I just don't want to do it anymore. I've already spent so much time on it that I'm just ready for it to be gone.
Do you think like that's the balance between the crafter and the artist, that the artist in you wants to create the next thing and the crafter of you is feeling lazy?
Yes, I think so. I think the crafter in me would want to do everything perfectly, and the artist in me just wants to get it done so I can get on to the next idea.
Are you a perfectionist? Like if you see suddenly the machine swiggling or something, or like the stitches not exactly aligning, does that bother you?
Never, never at all. Because I want to make as many as I can. I have so many ideas that I want to get out. I've got so many things that I'm really interested in that I would love to make more. So if there's a little wiggle in the machine, it doesn't matter. That's not what's important. The important thing is finishing so that the idea is out of my head and I can see if it's good enough to make more or if I should make different like that so that I can learn from it. I need to finish it. So I would way rather finish it than worry about the machine.
Right. Do you remember the first quilt that you sold?
Yes, I do. It was to a friend. For her brother's wedding.
Was it difficult to price?
Yeah, I mean, pricing is still difficult. um, but I mean, you know, then I was just making it up. You know, who knows? Like whatever. You know, what can you afford? You know. um, but I mean, pricing is always difficult for artists because there's a fine line between what you need to live and what someone else can afford. And, you know, there's an unfortunate part to the art world about a piece of art is only as interesting as the amount you can sell it for, which I think is really unfortunate. But that's just the world of commerce right now.
How do you market yourself?
That's not my biggest skill set. I will fully admit that. That is not the thing that I do the best. But I try hard to be present on social media, you know, Instagram, Facebook. I try to do, I mean, I used to do a lot of shows before COVID, doing probably 12 or 15 shows a year all over the world. And shows are a good marketing tool.
The way you see it, like Instagram, Facebook, like all the social media, is that just the marketing tool? Like that's how you see it, or is there like more to it?
I mean, I get inspiration as well, for sure. Like, for example, I would have never met Zach if it wasn't for Instagram. And I really appreciate learning from him and being friends with him. So there is inspiration, but I mostly think of it as a marketing tool. I mean, because that's a platform where I can reach thousands of people. And I think that's really, really interesting and helpful for an artist. When it used to be, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, you would just rely on the gallery that you worked with to get in, maybe 100 people to an opening and hope those people were influential or whatever. But now I can personally talk to tens of thousands of people, and that is interesting and fascinating and really brilliant.
Well, are you ever like frustrated with Instagram or Facebook and all their like algorithms and trying to figure it out and trick it into your favor?
Yes, of course. I wish I didn't have to think about that. I would much rather just make things I think are interesting and hope other people see them. That would be so much easier. But instead, I have to be, my own marketing team and, design systems that are, make it better and figure out what time of day to plan and, post and all of this. I really don't want, that's not interesting to me. So I would prefer not to have to do all that.
Right. Well, how much time do you actually spend on social media?
Oh boy, I don't want to know. I mean, it's very addictive. It's very good at its job. So, I go on there to post something that I think is interesting. I want to, talk about some project I'm working on. And then all of a sudden it's, 1 hour later, I've been looking at everyone's like, dinners and cute cats or, whatever the thing is that I'm looking at that day. Or so, I mean, I'm on it every day for probably an hour or more every day, at least.
Well, I mean, like right now you established like a certain name for yourself. People know you, you have like large following on Instagram. How did it all start? How were those first sales happening? Was it like difficult to find the audience?
So I'm really, really fortunate that a lot of people found me in the beginning. A lot of people reached out to me or, well, I mean, and I will say that didn't come from zero work on my end. Like I say, I tried to do a lot of shows. And so I talked to, hundreds of galleries and, museums and collectors and just, some small percentage of the people that I talked to thought I was interesting enough to take a chance on me. And then they'd put a show up, and from that show, maybe something would sell, or maybe someone else would find me that wanted to put me in a magazine, or, just like that, kind of organically. So that, doing as much work as possible, every opportunity to get my work in front of as many people as possible.
In your ideal world, like if the money wasn't crucial, right? Like if you didn't depend on it, what's your dream as far as quilting?
So, the thing that I love is two parts. I love making it, right? I really like making quilts. I think that part is really interesting. And so, you know, that is a big part of something I really enjoy. You know, if in a perfect world, I would just be able to make quilts all the time because it's interesting. But I also think that it's interesting, and I only know that it's interesting if I have an audience, right? If I'm able to show people and they say, I like that, or I don't like that, or, and my favorite one is always, oh, I've never thought about quilts that way before. So that's my favorite because, you know, that feels like a legacy, right? That feels like I'm doing something with my life when someone else gets to say, you've changed my understanding in some small way of the world I live in. And I think that is so heart opening.
Right. Well, do you get that from other quilters? Like let's say some, you know, like traditional quilter who like been doing quilts all their lives, and suddenly like they see your quilts and your approach to quilts, and that changed their understanding of the possibilities of quilting. Like, do you get that a lot?
I do a lot. Although I will say, and my ego hates every bit of it, there's a lot of quilters who are doing things that are kind of similar to the style that I've been cultivating for 15 years. So less people come to me to be inspired because there's more people doing it, which is good in some ways because the industry is changing and there's more interesting stuff going on and all of that. But you know, part of my ego still wants to be the only one.
Well, I talked to Zach. He was telling me the story of how somebody sent him the whole box of bathing suits and he was creating quilt from that. And I see a little bit of that in your quilts as well, because you use like ties and like all kinds of materials. How did that happen? Like, was that by design? Did you wanted to use all different kinds of materials?
Yeah, I definitely chose that. So I primarily use reclaimed, recycled clothing, textile. So I'll go to secondhand stores and buy, you know, 100 pounds of clothing, and I will take that and deconstruct that, and then that'll be what I make quilts out of. Because I think each of those pieces of fabric have a story to it. And I think that's really, really nostalgic and interesting. I mean, I find that there are people who, you know, come and see a quilt who will say, oh, wow, I used to have that shirt. And then, you know, really enjoy that quilt because they have a certain entry point to it or something like that. And also just because, you know, there's plenty of fabric out there that's just being discarded because, you know, if there's a stain on your shirt, you can't wear it as a shirt. That makes sense. But it can become a piece of a quilt or something. And I think that that's really also very interesting and has a lot of tie into the history of quilting and materials.
Does it make it more challenging to work with such like different materials, because you don't even, it's not like you take just bathing suits and make it into a quilt. You have like a piece of this and a piece of that and like 7 pieces of that, I think, like combined. Is it difficult just technically to keep it all, make it into square eventually?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It's the first couple are difficult because you're not used to, you know, like I also don't cut to the fabric, so some of it's bias, some of it's quarter bias, some of it's right on grain, some of it's woven, some of it's knit, some of it's, you know, satin, some of it's wool, and so they all act a little bit differently. But I think that because they all act a little bit differently, it all kind of falls together by the end. You know, if I was trying to do all quilting cotton and then like just a few strips of like t-shirt, then it would be really, really difficult. But because there's so many different kinds, I feel like it all kind of works out at the end.
Well, do you expect people to like ever use those quilts? Like, do you think you're creating usable art, or should it be just hung on the wall?
So I've been trying to make more quilts for beds over the last several years because before, you know, I wanted it for display. I wanted it to be, you know, in a museum and 4,000 years from now, you know, be displayed and be important. But I also am really enjoying the idea of making things that people experience. So I'm working on that idea the last couple of years and trying to think about what it means to make something that becomes unpermanent because it's being used.
So if 4,000 years from now somebody finds your quilt, what story do you think they're gonna find in it?
Oh boy, I don't, that's an interesting point. I mean, the hope, of course, is that they see it and they say, oh, that's the guy who changed the way that we understand quilts for the world, something big like that. Something, some kind of massive, like, oh, this is the turning point in the way that, the whole world used their discarded fabric, or, like, that's obviously the biggest possibility, the biggest idea, maybe the biggest ego, right? That would be something I would love, is that 4,000 years from now they kind of said, that was the turning point, and that's, that would be brilliant.
Well, if you like, when you create your quilts, do you actually think about the story that you're trying to put into it? Like, every quilt of yours has some, like, a book that can be written about it?
Yeah, every story, every quilt has a narrative component to it, for sure. They certainly have. It's like an exhibition that I'll make, or a series that I make will be trying to tell some part of a story, that I want to convey. Maybe, I did a series about sort of men making quilts. Like, is it okay for boys to make quilts? I did a series, like you said, about the anamorphic ones that are, the figure is skewed, so you have to walk around it in order to see the figure on it. So that's talking about quilts as sculpture. I did that series of log cabins, which is talking about quilt blocks as design elements. So each of these combined is a kind of narrative understanding of pushing quilts into other ways of thinking.
Was there ever like a quilt that you've seen of another artist that was that eye-opening moment for you, like that you started thinking about quilts in a different way from just that?
I mean, I'm sure it happens all the time. I mean, I'm trying to think of any, like, one really good moment where I sort of, turned the corner and just said, wow, that's something I've never thought about before. I get lots of little ideas from other pieces, for sure. I can't think of, like, one moment where I turned the corner and there was like a quilt that's fully out of my understanding, but I certainly get a lot of really brilliant inspiration from parts of people's quilts. Like, one of my best quilt friends is Joe Cunningham, and I learn from him every time I see something, because he thinks exactly backwards from me. We just think the opposite way, and so it's really fun to look at his quilts and just think, why in the world would you do that? And it helps me think differently about my own quilts.
Well, I want to ask you a question as a former knitter. I don't know if you're still dabbling in knitting, but I was knitting, I got into the whole Shetland lace. And in Shetland lace, you do, at the end, you do grafting. So you combine two parts together. You knit border, then you need another border in the center, and then you graft them together, sewing them together, basically. And I managed to do that. It was like difficult at the beginning. I sort of got the idea with more shawls that I was knitting. And then 2 years later, somebody in one of the Facebook groups asked how to do grafting, and I showed the video of myself doing that. And then somebody else commented that I was doing it completely wrong.
Oh,
Did
no.
you ever get like a moment like that, because you are self-taught quilter pretty much? Like, do you ever get like comments from other people that you're doing something wrong?
I used to. Oh boy, when I first started quilting, and I would go, put a piece in a show, or in people would forever. I mean, my binding was the worst. My binding was, because I didn't know there was some way to do it. I didn't know there was any rules at all. So I would get these like little tittery comments like, oh, but he sure doesn't know what he's doing, or, they call that the quilt police. But certainly, people tell me that I'm, early on. Although now that I've made probably 400 quilts and I've, toured the world with them, and I get to have a little bit of a resume, less people tell me that I'm doing it wrong. Even if I'm not doing it traditionally correct. They at least believe that I know how to do it and am doing it on purpose. Like, for example, I sew my bindings on by machine on both sides. I don't want to do it by hand. I just don't want to. And that's maybe not the way to do it to kind of win a traditional show, for sure. But I do that on purpose. And I think now people kind of trust that I do it on purpose. If they think it's bad, that's not what I'm saying. There's certainly people who don't agree with my methods or prefer the way that I do it. But I think people at least believe that I did it on purpose, which is a nice place to be.
Right. Well, when you mentioned that you did this first traditional quilt like much later into your quilting career, was that also to like prove yourself that you can do it like masters do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because like you said, people, and like there's a fine line, because somebody telling you you're doing something wrong, maybe they have a way to do it that's stronger or faster or, will last longer or something like that. And that's great. But maybe they're telling you you're doing it wrong because you do it differently than they do it. And it doesn't actually make any difference. It's not stronger or faster. And you have to figure that out for yourself. You have to try it 2 different ways and pull on it or something to see if their method is better or worse. So, I think it's really important to learn the history of anything that you do so that you can kind of make intentional choices. But yes, absolutely. So the show we were talking about where I made those 50 log cabin quilts, that was a lot about sort of proving that I can do it and sort of understanding at the same time what the history is and what their tradition is and kind of why some of that's important.
Well, were you surprised when you were doing it at the difficulty level of it? Like, was there, did you think it's going to be much easier, and was surprised to find out that this whole 90-degree angles at exactly the right spot is actually not as easy as it looks?
So actually, I found that the traditional quilts were easier than I thought they would be. Until I started doing some of these double wedding rings. Those are the devil. Those can be really, some of these curved pieces can be hard. But the log cabin, once I got the hang of it, I felt was really, I won't say easy, right? Nothing's not the first time you make something, it's never easy. So I'm not at all trying to be diminutive and say like, oh, these are easy things. But what I am trying to say is that, that once you get the kind of hang of something, that it wasn't quite as hard as as maybe it was made out to be for the 90 degrees one, because fabric is stretchy. Fabric is brilliant. If it's not quite right, within, a little half inch, you could just kind of pull it and iron it and it all, quilt it and it all comes out in the end. And so I feel like that for me was the learning there, is that with a little bit of practice, everything is a lot more accessible than you might think it would be.
So I know you guys just moved to a new house. Was that because your stash was overgrowing? Like, what's your stash of fabrics look like?
Oh boy, no, our house is much smaller now. So I actually have had a hard time fitting everything into all of the, attic and no, we moved to California to kind of come to a different art scene and find a place where our sort of values overlapped with our community a little bit stronger.
Right. So when you right now, I see you have that long arm machine, and I'm sure your equipment changed from the day you started. How did it change? What was that journey like?
So the first sewing machine that I had was called New Home, which was Genomi's first brand in the United States. It was my dad's girlfriend's mom who gave it to me. She was a tailor for some years. So it was a nice machine, but it was, 37 years old, and it did, forward, backwards, and maybe a zigzag if you talk to it nicely. And that's what I probably made, 30 or 50 quilts on that, including quilting them, in, tiny studios, and just sort of shoving quilts under there, trying to make it work. Until, and now I've got a brilliant Genomi as well, still with Genomi, brilliant company. But it's a long throat space. It's it's got more stitches than I'm sure I will ever use. And, digital this, and it's got a thread cutter and all this cool stuff. And I've got the long arm machine now, which allows me to quilt a lot better and easier than shoving it under that small domestic machine.
What's more physically challenging, like to do the long arm or like to domestic little sewing machine?
So I stand for both of them. All of my studio is standing everywhere. I think it's actually the domestic, because you're doing these little things so many times. I get this little shoulder gets really tight when I keep doing the same. I'm working on a log cabin, say, and you've got 500 of the same just line that you just have to sew and sew and sew. And you just get, my shoulders get really tight and I'm up like here. Whereas the long arm, it's a lot looser and you're kind of, wiggling it around and it's a little bit more kind of free form and fun. So I'd say that the domestic is kind of the harder one for me.
What are you thinking about, like, while you actually sewing? Like, are you concentrating on the technical part of it, or does your brain just wanders in different places? Like, what's happening? How much attention does it require from you?
You know what? I listen to a lot of books on tape. Audiobooks is kind of where I go. So if I'm making a quilt, I'll make 1 or 2 blocks quietly and like really paying attention to all the parts of it and making sure that my measurements fit and everything. And then once I've done it and I trust myself and I trust the design, then I'll put on my audiobook and just kind of think about what I'm gonna have for lunch or something like that.
Has it ever been your ambition to like make a whole quilt by hand?
Never at all. I think it's really cool. I think that handwork can be very beautiful. But for me, I'm still working through ideas. There's not enough hours in the day for the ideas I already have. And so for me, I would never want to go to a process that takes longer.
Right. How is your family reacted when you announced that you decided not to be an architect and become a quilter?
My mom is always very supportive of whatever. She's very mom, like, oh, honey, as long as you're happy. Well, my dad told me I was fully worthless, so that was that. So they reacted in different ways.
Well, one of the reasons I ask you have a lot of quilts with like motivational phrases on them. Like, why did you decide to do that?
So that is a collaboration with my wife, who's amazing, and that's her art practice are these affirmation messages. So that's her art practice is putting those in places like billboards or flying a plane with it on there, or kind of getting these messages in front of people in ways that are traditionally advertising. And so the collaboration between me and her is making these affirmation quilts that we will then leave somewhere and someone will find and keep for free, And so it's about kind of giving aspiration into the world. And so, it's just a lot about, what can we give to the world? Everyone's having a hard time right now. It's just the way the world is. And maybe the world has always been that way in some degree, but just sort of being able to present positive affirmations feels really good and important.
Do you feel like the audience that you have, your fan base, the collectors of your quilts, do you feel like they give it back to you, like that you're not worthless, you're actually here for a reason?
Yeah, I mean, I am so blessed that people are so positive and supportive, and people. Yeah, I'm sometimes surprised that people drive to come see my shows, and it just warms my heart every time. It does make me feel really like I've touched on something that I should be doing with my life when people kind of say that they are inspired in their own work or inspired in their own life or think differently about craft objects or just their human experience. I think that that really makes me feel like I am kind of, I'm doing, you know, the job I'm put here to do.
Do you remember your first celebrity moment? Have you had your first celebrity moment when you like somebody recognized you on the street or like somewhere like unexpected place?
You know what? Yes, one time I went to a grocery store in Seattle, Washington, and this woman who was working there, she said, hey, do you make quilts? And I said, yeah, I do. And she's like, are you Luke Haynes? And it was really fun. It was very kind of, you know, a fun moment because, you know, I didn't know who she was and she just knew me from the internet. And so that was a really cool moment.
Do you have like any desire to write a book about your journey, about like to do a collection of all your quilts in one place and tell their story?
I've started a couple times, I will admit. I really wanted to do a quilt of those 50 log cabin, a book of those 50 log cabin quilts. And I've started a couple of times. It's just really hard. And I'll tell you why, because my big soapbox is quilts or sculpture. And so if I'm taking a very flat picture of a quilt, it doesn't explain a lot of the qualities that I'm trying to convey. And so I've had a really hard time getting pictures that help me explain what are the more beautiful parts about quilting. So I've just been trying that. And also, honestly, I'm kind of nervous to write a book because they sort of either sell or they don't. And if they don't, it would hurt my feelings. You know what I mean? So I've thought about it a lot. I've started a couple of times and I just haven't really, you know, I talked to a publisher one time and the woman was really lovely, super kind woman. But she said, look, you're just not famous enough for us to guarantee that we could sell a book. So you can self-publish a book and maybe you can do it, maybe you can't. But that was definitely a moment where it sort of put me back a little bit and said, okay, maybe it's not the time for a book yet. I don't really know, but I thought about it and I really enjoy telling the story and I would love people to have access to more than just pictures on my online.
Right. Do you get those moments when you doubt yourself and you're like, why did I even try to do it? Like, what do I know? Like, do you ever get the imposter syndrome?
Well, I mean, yes and no. Yes, of course, right? If your job as an artist is to be better every piece you make, and if you make a piece that's not better, then you have to sort of challenge why you certainly have to kind of say, okay, why is this one worse? Like, what did I do wrong? What's going on? But if I think about it in terms of sort of my life and my career, as long as sort of every year I'm moving forward up, and it doesn't have to be every piece, then I feel pretty good about it. You know, as with everyone, the last couple of years have been kind of hard because all of my shows got canceled. I mean, you know, going from 12 shows a year to one show in 2 years was really, really difficult. I mean, maybe 3 or 4 shows in 2 years. I won't say one, but it's a really hard transition. And also, you know, people can't afford guild talks in the way they could before. So there's just a big shift in my business, which I've really had to rethink the way that I took that emotionally, right? Because, you know, if you make something, if you're an actor and nobody hires you, then you're like, okay, does it mean I'm getting old? Am I not good at it? Can I not sing as well? So if you're an artist and you're not getting, you know, income or shows anymore, do you think maybe is my work not good enough or whatever? And so I've been really pushing on the edges of that. But I do think that, you know, there's a lot to be said about no one having much going on in the last couple of years. And it's given me a time to work on different stuff and build different skill sets. So it's a double-edged sword.
Well, do you feel like you made 400 quilts or something like that? Were any of those something you consider like your top quilt, your masterpiece, like something that's impossible to do something better? Or do you think like it's still ahead of you? Like, where do you see yourself, like in your journey as an artist, right? Are you at the peak right now?
So it's my goal as an artist to always be better in the future, right? I mean, otherwise, I might as well go get a job that pays me a lot of money and, retire in, southern France. But if I can never make anything better, why make more? So it's my goal to always make better. It's my goal. And I'm not always successful in that. Certainly sometimes, there's a learning curve to a new type of practice or a new method of quilting. Like right now, I'm trying to figure out how to make quilts for people to use. So I need them to take me a lot less time because I can't charge that much if my peer group is going to buy them. And I can't sell them. It's just no one's buying them. It's hard for me. But I'm also recognizing that there's a learning curve to what it is to make a fully new product and present it in a fully new way. So it's really interesting. As long as I remember that it's not an ego issue, it's a transition issue, then I remember that it's my goal to always be better, and that, it's okay if there's sort of a dip, and that I can continue towards the future to make better work, So there have been pieces in the past that I've spent a lot of time on that I'm very proud of, but it's my goal that my masterpiece is in the future.
Well, if somebody came to you today, a friend you've met, and would say, look, like, I'm thinking of becoming a full-time artist. Like, I have this thing that I think I'm really good at. Should I do that? Like, what would your advice be?
So my advice would be, why do you want to do it as a career, right? Like, can you get a day job that buys your house and pays your bill and gets you gas and everything, and then make the work on the side? Because are you passionate about making, or are you passionate about selling? Are you passionate about having other people see it? Are you passionate about changing the world? Are you passionate about becoming a household name in a art practice that is never before been done? All of those are different ways of approaching, right? If somebody is just passionate about making things, I absolutely don't think they should make a job out of it.
So what was your reason?
So for me, twofold. One, I am passionate about the dialogue. I really want to make objects, again, that designer architect brain, where you put something in the world for people to experience. And then the best architects will tell you how to use the building by the design. If you've gone into a really lovely house and it feels great, and where the living room is, and where to put your coat and all of this without there having to be signs or somebody tell you, that's a good design, right? But you've also gone into houses that are kind of awkward, and there's a hallway right there, and you don't know which one is the bathroom and which one is the kitchen. And that might be less less quality architecture. And I love that about art world. So the same thing, where I want to put things into the world that influence people's experience and interaction without me having to stand there and tell them every time or editorialize. So for me, the thing that kind of got me up in the morning was innovation, because I love to think and push and try new things, but also the dialogue between my objects and people who engage with them.
Well, the question comes then, have you ever created the quilt with a story in mind, and that story got completely misconstrued? Like nobody saw that story and they thought it was about something completely else.
Not yet, because the stories of the quilts are usually very small. Like, quilts are sculpture, or log cabin is a design prompt, or you can make a picture out of fabric, or clothing has a story. All of these are that's the full narrative of quilt. And so far it hasn't been too heady that it's not pretty accessible. I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but nobody's come up to me and told me.
Well, do you feel like the fact that you are very vocal on Instagram has to do with that you basically like educate people through your posts of what you mean and what you had in mind and tell them that story.
Yeah, I mean, I try to do that as well, just because, in my mind, it's obvious. You look at it, you're like, oh, of course, that's what he meant, but maybe that's not true. Not everyone can live in my brain.
How do you guys because your wife is also an artist, how do you balance each other's excitement or frustrations? Like, what if both of you going through like a really low period of time? How do you deal with that?
So far, we've been just able to take turns, but it's my day to complain and you can have tomorrow. And even if we're having kind of a low period at the same time, we still kind of take turns and just sort of, take care of each other. And it's just, she's very compassionate, and it's worked out really well that way, to just kind of take a step back and say, honey, do you mind if I have a hard day today? Can you have tomorrow? And it's, then you can, because, I love her so much, and I'm like, okay, if it's your turn today, like I can eat my ego or angst or whatever I'm having for 24 hours and like make her a sandwich and tell her she's pretty, and then it's like, okay, I can wait till tomorrow. And so far it's not that we're like that every day, but I just mean if it's at the same time.
Right. Well, you mentioned the collaboration with her about those affirmation quilts. Do you talk about every single idea? Like, do you discuss every quilt?
So she makes the words and I make the quilt. So we don't really,
like, if you do your own quilts, like, do you discuss all the ideas together? Do you bounce ideas?
I like just on my own projects.
Right.
Yes, usually just for fun, over dinner table, I'll tell her what I'm working on. And, I would say probably everything.
Does she ever criticize your work? Like, says like, well, I don't think that works really. You might want
sometimes. And it's like, and she's sometimes very right and sometimes very wrong. And, sometimes I have to make it anyway. And then I'm just like, oh, I'll show you and you'll have to see. And sometimes I do that and I'm like, oh, I should have never done that. She was right. And sometimes, I get to prove her wrong and I get to say, look, honey, I did it anyway. And look how cool. But that's just the nature of any kind of critique relationship. If someone's offering, she has her own bias, I have mine. And so we both get to kind of work through those.
How can my viewers help you to promote yourself, to achieve your dreams, to make your reality better?
That's a lovely question, and I appreciate the question. The thing that I've been doing that I'm really, really passionate about, I haven't mentioned yet, I've been teaching classes. So every month I've been teaching a class, Luke University, and I'm really enjoying building this community of conversation. I mean, certainly I'm sharing skill sets, but it's also about kind of the conversation between all the students and what they want to learn, and so I can teach or bring on an expert in that. So creating kind of this dialogue through kind of teaching and sort of creating a community of people who are making amazing objects in the world, I think is something that is one thing that has kind of come out of the pandemic that I'm very passionate about. Is just like creating a community of makers who can kind of all challenge each other to be the best version of themselves and then put that into the world.
Right. So what's the plan for 2022? What are you working on?
I want to make 100 quilts for use. I want to make 100 bed quilts. So my goal is to make those and then find ways of getting those into people's experience. And that's going to be the challenge, is getting to figure out how to sell them and gift them and donate them. And, whatever the practice there is getting these quilts into people's human experience. And it's very different than my exhibitions before, because before I put a quilt on a wall and 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people could come by and look at it. And so they get a small interaction with it. But now I want it to be, 1, 2, 3, 5 people who interact with it for years. And so it's just a very different type of engagement with the object. And so that's my goal for this year, is to make 100 of those and then learn to understand what it means to put those into the world.
Well, I mean, the silly question maybe on my behalf, but when you put the quilt on the wall, right, when you display it, you don't really need to wash it that often or take care of it particularly. How is it different to make a quilt that's going to be used every day by somebody?
Everyone that I put on the wall, I make really, really strong. So they're the same. I mean, I make both of them very, very strong. Very, the ones that I make for the wall can go through the wash. They can be used. They're not going to fall apart. They're really, it's my intention to make them like a functional quilt would be. But I want them on the wall because I want them to last for, 100 years, not 40 years or something, 4,000 years, I guess. But I mean, the difference is just sort of recognizing that through use, these quilts that I'm making this year might fall apart, right? They might go away. But and being okay with that, and maybe that's part of the art, or I don't know. That's where I'm trying to play with this year.
Right. Well, I saw this pretty dog that you have. Have there ever been any disasters involving that puppy?
No, she's been really good. I mean, maybe a muddy footprint every once in a while, but that's par for the course. Nothing bad.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see what you're going to create, because I love seeing your posts and I love seeing the quilts you make. And I'm always wondering, like, if I'm reading them right, if you're the story that you meant and the story that I'm imagining are the same thing. But it's almost like if you're in the concert hall and you're listening to like a symphony, you have your own story that you imagine about that symphony, not necessarily what the composer had in mind. You might be surprised of what they actually had in mind, but it nonetheless becomes your story as well. So that's what I like about quilts,
Yeah.
It's almost like you see it and you imagine your own thing. You relate differently. Well, thank you so much, Luke, for finding time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. I know you're very busy with the move and everything. So thank you for being my guest today. And I'm going to put all the links to your Instagram and Facebook under the description of this video, so people can find you and maybe join your class or something, or just say hello.
Oh, perfect. I love that. Well, thank you very much. And thanks everyone else for watching. And please feel free to reach out if you have any more questions.
Thank you.